Hey everyone, I'm Bobby Sylvester, and we've got a fun episode coming up. But first, I want to remind you all about the sweepstakes we have going on right now, thanks to one of our sponsors, PristineAuction.com. Pristine Auction has signed jerseys, signed helmets, and all kinds of great memorabilia to bid on, with hundreds of items being auctioned off every day. And we landed an Antonio Brown signed jersey that we're giving away. All you have to do to enter the contest is rate and review us on iTunes, then send a screenshot to contest@fantasypros.com. When you do that, you'll be entered into all giveaways for the rest of the season, and I know what one's coming up next. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. So get it in now. You'll be entered for all these. And in the meantime, please support Pristine Auction by taking a look at what they have for you, and please make sure to let them know Fantasy Pros sent you. All right, on to the show. Hey guys and gals, I'm Bobby Sylvester with Mike Tagliere, and this is the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. Tags, what's going on?
Nothing much, man. It's funny, you just talked about the Pristine Auction thing. I was on a podcast yesterday. It was like a video format, and so they saw the helmets behind me. They're like, whoa, where'd those come from? And it's really neat. It's a conversational piece, so I thought it was cool to talk about. It's just, I was buying helmets from there before they were even our sponsor, so it's pretty cool. I am looking forward to the show. I'm also looking forward to the next giveaway we're doing, as you know.
I need to fix up my office. I've got kids' marble towers behind my desk. All right, so today we're going to be covering backup running backs. We're going to do the Name That Player game, then talk some auction strategy. And we're joined today by Fantasy Pros featured writer, jokester, and all-around great guy, Dan Harris. Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Not bad, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. You'll notice I'm trying to butter you up so that when you come on the baseball podcast next time, you'll give me easier trivia questions. For those of you who don't listen to the baseball podcast, I usually ask the trivia questions, but we flipped it around last time so we could get Dan back on the show. That was his condition. He asked the hardest questions in the world. Didn't even give me multiple choice, so I had to try really hard. And fortunately, I happen to remember that Babe Ruth held the single season record for total bases with 457 in 1921. I mean, who knows that stuff? Otherwise, the listeners would have thought I didn't know anything, but Dan tried to make my life really hard. And, we're going to be doing a contest today. Dan, are you excited about this?
No, not even a little bit. I enjoy the trivia aspect of it, but obviously we're all kind of analysts, so we ask tough questions. So I feel like I always feel dumb at the end. So it was nice to be able to turn the tables on you in the baseball podcast. But certainly when I saw that there would be some sort of Name That Player thing again this time, I was not excited.
That makes me so happy.
I love listening to it when you guys do it to other people, but when I'm on, I'd rather skip it. But that's cool. We'll roll with the punches.
Everyone's plotting against me to try to break up my undefeated record with the Name That Player. Tags is tailoring the questions toward your skill set. I guarantee it. And Clinton, he's our producer, schedules it right when I eat lunch. But I'll tell you guys, I'm ahead of the curve. My stomach is all filled up with some hot sauce soup today. I'm ready to roll.
Oh, God, hot sauce soup. You and your food takes are horrible, man. You just need to stop eating altogether.
Well, man, what do you call it? When you have chicken noodle soup, it's because the main ingredients are chicken and noodles. Mm-hmm. So, when your base is hot sauce, what do you call it?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on what else is in there. If it's just hot sauce soup, that's weird.
I don't know, man. Last time I was here, we were talking about artichokes on our pizza, and that was really bummed me out for a week. So I don't know what we're going to do with hot sauce soup over here.
Everybody that comes on agrees with us on that one, Dan. Nobody really likes Bobby's take on that. And now hot sauce soup. I think we just need to move forward to the football questions. And,
let's just get going. This is horrible.
So the thing is, so basically the readers, if there's listeners out there and you've been reading my articles, you're probably going to catch on to some of these Name That Players, because now it's I'm starting to put all this information that we talk about on the show into article form. If you guys haven't seen, I've been doing player profiles nonstop. So some of this stuff is from there. Some of it's from different articles. So hopefully you guys have been reading up and figuring out what it is that these players are. So if you guys are ready, I'm going to start with, we have 3 players. If you guys have never heard this show before, it's called Name That Player. I'm going to give hints to these 2, and I'm going to let them kind of hash it out and figure out whoever gets it first. They obviously get the point for that. It's best of 3. So Bobby is somehow undefeated. So Dan, can I have you step up this episode, please?
I'll try, but I could not hate this more. But I'm ready. I'm focused. I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
All right, here we go. First player. I saw a target on 31.2% of my routes in 2016, which was by far the most in the NFL. By comparison, the best wide receiver in the game, Julio Jones, was targeted on just 27% of his. So we're talking about a 4% increase in terms of targeted on his routes.
Rob Gronkowski.
Nope. I finished with fewer than 600 receiving yards, but somehow snuck into the top 15 wide receivers.
Devontae Adams?
Nope.
DeAndre Hopkins?
Nope. I'm the number 1 wide receiver on my team, though I may not be made for that.
Travis Kelce.
Nope. I used to play special teams, but not
Golden
anymore.
Tate.
Nope.
What is going on here?
I have gold teeth.
That doesn't help me.
It should help. It should help. I play for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Tyreek Hill?
Yes.
Thank goodness.
Yes. Tyreek Hill was targeted on 31.2% of his routes in 2016.
Are you kidding me?
No, that was definitely the most among any wide receiver, and he was a top 15 receiver despite having fewer than 600 receiving yards. That's madness.
I honestly just did not believe that he was targeted.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking,
That was really
too.
what it was. Honestly, when I was pausing, I was just like, well, I can't be. But basically, by process of elimination, there was nobody else left on the Chiefs.
I thought for a second, like, Chris Conley, because he's amazing. Like, better than Tyreek Hill, but I was like, oh, he didn't have that many
with
touchdowns.
Chris Conley, by the way, is one of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen in fantasy.
It's disturbing.
Right? It's weird. It's very weird.
It is. I hope it pans out for him, though.
It's the artichoke hearts on pizza of fantasy takes.
I mean,
you know
if Bobby can get Kevin White and Chris Conley on the field at the same time, like, I'm pretty sure that Bobby would never come out of his room.
Yeah, I really hope both those guys blow up this year because you'll go down as a fantasy football legend no matter what you do for the rest of your fantasy
He would.
career.
It's 100% true. If you throw enough stuff in the wallet, well, something will stick. All right, you guys ready for player number 2?
Yes.
Probably not, man. I'm so humiliated after that last one. I mean, Dan beat me on one question. I don't know.
I'm not
maybe
proud
we
of
should
that
quit
one
this.
either, so let's go.
All right, guys. You guys better be able to get this one before I tell you what team he plays for. I've seen 26 red zone targets over the last 2 years and have scored
each of the last 2 years?
No, over the last 2 years combined, and I have scored 16 touchdowns on
Dante
those
Moncrief.
26 targets. No. I rank just 21st in targets among tight ends over the last 2 years, but I've actually scored 18 touchdowns in that time, which is more than any other tight end in the league.
Kyle Rudolph.
Nope.
Jordan Reed.
Nope. I've only played
Delaney
21
Walker.
games in the last 2 years.
No, you already said Jordan Reed. Oh, crud.
There are actually just 4 wide receivers who have scored more touchdowns than me over the last 2 years, despite me playing just 21 games.
Antonio Gates.
Nope. With all that being said, I rank just 16th in yards among tight ends over the last 2 years, making people question where I'm being drafted.
Jimmy Graham.
Nope. I
Tyler
play for the
Eifert?
Cincinnati Bengals. Yes.
All right.
You did it right as I was about to say that. So, Dan, wow. Dan takes the second one.
I mean, there are like 4 tight ends left in the game, frankly. So although I am winning, I take no pride in winning. Oh, I mean, I guess a little pride, but not really. Yeah. All right. Eifert. Okay. That makes sense.
It's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy. All right. So, Bobby, I'm going to give you last chance so you're not shut out. We have one more player here. All right. I didn't catch 40 passes last year, and I finished with less than 500 receiving yards, but I finished top 12 at my position. And no, I'm not a running back.
Top 12 in his position. Kobe Fleener.
Nope. My 53 targets ranked 27th at my position, and I was
Jack Doyle.
And I was out targeted by a guy on my team almost 2-1.
Martellus Bennett.
Nope.
Hunter Henry.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. Bobby didn't even get his own guy. I put that in there
Yes.
for you, Bobby.
Well, I mean, you didn't start with he's the greatest player ever, so how am I supposed to know you're talking about Hunter Henry?
Bobby gets shut out on Name That Player. I never thought this was going to
man.
happen.
That one I will take, though. See, that one, we didn't have to go to the guy's team, and we didn't have to go crazy and stuff like that. That one, especially because I felt like it was maybe set up there for Bobby. I've gotten some sort of inklings into the way we do trivia and stuff like that, and I felt like that one was set up for Bobby because it's his man crush,
was,
on Hunter
for
Henry.
sure.
We knew you were getting really discouraged, Dan, and so
Right.
we set up this sweep so that you would, get excited about it next time. And,
Well, I
and come on
appreciate it. Okay, you got me now. I'll take it easy on you next time on baseball.
That's too funny. I know a lot of people have liked
Wow.
this game. People have asked me where the game's gone, and we wanted to bring it back for you guys.
That
So
was
Dan,
horrible.
Congrats. Bobby,
Thanks.
we need to get better.
That was horrible.
Yeah.
I have nothing to say. I need to get better. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, what else are we talking about today,
I want to
Bobby?
talk about Calvin Johnson. I got to pick your guys' brains about this, okay? So we know why he retired from the Lions, but do you guys think he might come back? I mean, we all know if he did, he'd still be a top 20 receiver, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, Tags. I've seen him. We just did the Scott Fishbowl stuff with had 11 bench spots, and I've seen him drafted basically at the end of all those drafts. I mean, personally, I'd be totally shocked, and I don't really think there's any realistic chance. I mean, I'm all for mending fences and inviting him to camp to repair his relationship with the Lions and everything like that. But I mean, he gave an interview in December where he was basically like his body is, his finger is mangled, and he might need some rare surgery. Apparently, my wife told me his ankle was still bothering him on Dancing with the Stars, but I can't attest to that. His knees, he talked about concussions and stuff like that. And, Marshawn Lynch aside, the idea that he's going to be out of the game completely, I mean, it's different than Adrian Peterson when there's sort of like, he's still planning to play. Guys who are out of the game and retired, I don't really think there's a realistic chance that he's going to come back.
Yeah, do I doubt for a second that Calvin Johnson could come back and be a top 20 receiver? No, I don't. I think Calvin Johnson is the best wide receiver of our generation. I should say last generation, right? Because, I've had this conversation with people and the fact that some people say his career wasn't long enough to be a Hall of Famer, and I say that's a bunch of BS because Calvin Johnson, you can't talk about the last 10 years of football and not talk about Calvin Johnson. Like the guy was just dominant, and he still would be to a certain extent. Now, with that being said, he said that he wanted to go to the Raiders, and if he went to the Raiders, no, he's not going to be a top 20 wide receiver because Amari Cooper's the GOAT and Michael Crabtree is their steal touchdown as well. But no, in all reality, I don't see Calvin Johnson coming back at all. I don't think it's going to happen. I was sad when he retired, but I've also made peace with that. It's like, don't come back, Calvin. Like, because don't do this to me again, because it really, as a Bears fan, I get to see every Lions game and, in my market, I watched Barry Sanders growing up. I watched Walter Payton. And so I got to see some of the greats, and to see these guys walk away when they were still in their prime, it was really sad. But Calvin, as Dan mentioned, he was ailing. His body was beaten down. There was a reason he walked away. There's still loopholes that they'd have to jump through with his contract with the Lions because he is technically still under contract. And, we worry about that with Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch, as Dan said, he was away from the game. It's the same thing with Calvin Johnson. These guys are away from the game. Adrian Peterson was rehabbing an injury. He's been working this entire time. Marshawn Lynch was traveling the country. Calvin Johnson, I don't know what he's been doing. I apparently Dancing on the Stars. I don't watch the show, but that's apparently what he's been doing.
The Stars, Mike. Okay, if my wife is listening to
this
and you say Dancing on the Stars, she is gonna be pissed. So I'm just saving you, buddy.
I don't know much about pop culture. I will admit that, Bobby. I am totally behind on that. Bobby's behind on culture in general, but I'm behind on pop culture.
I don't know anything about pop culture. I like a lot of the reviews that we get on iTunes, and by the way, remember to send in your reviews for the Antonio Brown signed jersey giveaway. But a lot of the reviews we've got are like, I'm so glad you guys don't talk about pop culture. Because
and here we are.
It's because I don't know anything.
Yeah, by the way, I do feel like we all have kids. I feel like you reach a point where all of a sudden you have kids and you just completely lose any sense of what is going on in like pop culture world, right? I feel like I went from being like a young guy who kind of knew what was going on in the world outside of sports, and now I know absolutely nothing except Paw Patrol and Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and things like that. And that's pretty much it. Yep.
For sure. So I used to get up and watch NFL Network every morning, and now I get up and I watch Mickey Mouse, and my son makes me watch this. You guys know, like, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember this, but Denver the Last Dinosaur. It was a cartoon from when I was like a little kid, and it's on YouTube you're able to watch all these videos, and it's like the theme song. He sings along to this Denver the Dinosaur song, like he like mouths to it. He doesn't talk yet, but it is it puts him in a good mood in the morning. So that's what my morning is filled with.
Yeah, that's right. That's what our lives are like now.
Guys, I want to comment on this Calvin Johnson thing really quick, especially the thing you said about him not belonging in the Hall of Fame. A lot of people don't realize this, but with how many years he played, if you take those years compared to Jerry Rice, first 9 years or whatever it was, Calvin Johnson was better. He had a little bit less touchdowns because, Jerry Rice just happened to have Steve Young and Joe Montana throwing the football, while Calvin Johnson had Dan Orlovsky, or however you say his name, and all these random guys.
Orlovsky.
But Calvin Johnson, if he played as long as Jerry Rice, could have been the best ever. And I feel like Jerry Rice is the most untouchable best ever in any sport.
Yeah, I feel like generally with Hall of Fame, there's kind of two ways to get in either baseball or football. One is you can have longevity, right? And you can rack up total stats and things like that. That's one way. But frankly, if you are super elite, even if it's for a relatively short amount of time, and he played for a while. I mean, he wasn't like a 2 year, he wasn't in the league for 2 years or anything like that. And he was absolutely 100% elite, one of the top two or three wide receivers in the game. certainly that's got to get in. So he's obviously, I mean, I haven't really followed it, frankly, but if there are people talking that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, to me, that's just crazy talk. He's an obvious Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Tags, Dan, do you guys think that if Randy Moss came back today and Calvin Johnson, and we'll toss Terrell Owens in there as well, do you think all three of them would be top 30 receivers in football?
No, I think the game's passed those guys by, and it's not to say they couldn't play. And like Randy Moss, we saw him, with the Titans towards, and then the Patriots. Obviously, that's a different story. But I think at some point we have to say enough's enough, and these guys are just past the point. I think Calvin Johnson would be the one that I would bet on because he's still, what is he, 31 years old?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think I'd bet on Randy Moss.
That guy was pretty dang good. And I
sure
like how
was.
you said that Jerry Rice was the most untouchable greatest of all time, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Jordan, to me, is the greatest all time, unquestioned.
See, I don't think Jordan is the greatest of all time in basketball, though. I think Bill Russell is.
Yeah, I think that
Bill Russell won 11 championships. He never lost a championship in high school, in college. He had 25 rebounds per game and 8 blocks per game in the playoffs. He never lost a game 7.
He was on a pretty dang good team. I mean, I guess
Sure.
Jordan was too, but at the same time, if you grew up watching Michael Jordan, you know what he was to the game of basketball. Like, he was the game. But but I think, is there any, so can you guys agree with me? I said this the other day, and I said that Antonio Brown is someone that I don't think you should sell in Dynasty. I think you should ride until he's done with his career.
Yep.
Do you think that Antonio Brown can touch Jerry Rice in terms of talent? Watching him, he's a guy that he does so many things very, very, very well. And he's not Calvin Johnson. He's not going to jump up over guys and stuff like that. But Rice wasn't that guy either. Can Antonio Brown potentially play till he's 36 and post some pretty phenomenal numbers?
Same skill set, same work ethic, and both of those are extremely rare.
Yeah.
With that being said, everything would have to go right.
Right.
It's possible, but, again, Ben Roethlisberger and Josh Jobs, who's probably going to take over the job next year, are not Joe Montana and Steve Young.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Antonio Brown, and I think, Tags, you might have said this yourself. I mean, he's not the type of guy, he doesn't take huge hits all the time. I feel like he's a guy who's going to probably age well, and he does have sort of a similar skill set. Rice, though, how productive he remained until his late years was so just bizarre almost. You know what I mean? That I honestly couldn't predict that any current wide receiver could ever continue to do that. But if there was one guy that could do it, it would be a guy like Brown for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the time frame that he did it in. It's not like it was this pass-happy league or whatever.
Correct.
Defensive backs had a lot more leeway to play physical, too. I think if you send Antonio Brown back there, even if you put him with those Hall of Fame quarterbacks, I don't really think it's probably close. I think the stats for Brown might end up in the same neighborhood, but, probably not the touchdowns.
Yeah, I just pulled up Jerry Rice's numbers. It's just stupid. Like, from the age 36 to 40, he had 3 1,000-yard seasons. Like, that's just stupid.
And that's the deal, right? That's the thing. You cannot, at this point, predict that for anybody, no matter how good they are. A guy like Brown, you just can't really realistically say. Exactly.
He's like the Bartolo Colon of football players.
Right.
Oh, God. That is the worst. That is the woat, Bobby.
I know it is. Okay, so we're going to hop over and talk about, what are we talking about? Let me do All right, so we're going to hop over and talk about backup running backs here in a second. But first, I want to step back and tell you about one of the sponsors of today's show, rtsports.com. That's real-time fantasy sports. They have everything you're looking for in fantasy football this year. They have award-winning commissioner services with fully customizable leagues, a killer app, and perhaps most exciting are their best ball and actively managed leagues. Get this, they're also legal operators in New York, Missouri, Colorado, and most states. So if you're bumming out on missing out on a lot of this action, you can likely still play rtsports.com/pros. They've paid out millions to winners. Again, that's rtsports.com/pros. And please be sure to type pros so they know we sent you. All right, guys, backup running backs. And, there's a lot of theory out there about the handcuff strategy in general. Whether or not you should handcuff your star players, whether or not you should get these, situations where we don't know who the starter is going to be and you just get the number 25 and 30 running back on the board from the same team. How do you guys feel about this general strategy? And then we'll talk about some of the players. Dan, you're first.
I feel like as a general matter, people have pretty strong feelings about this. And I hate to say it, but I don't really. I mean, generally, I'm not like a handcuff guy. I'm not a guy who kind of goes for the platoon. I think there are a few reasons. I mean, I think number one is we don't usually know who the handcuff is. We might think we do, but I mean,
good point.
Right? Last year, everybody wanted Charles Sims as Doug Martin's handcuff, but it was Jacquizz Rodgers who wound up doing it. You know what I mean? Jamal Charles owners, they always took Niles Davis, but that was Charkandrick West a couple of years ago who did it. So I feel like number one, even if we think we do, we don't always know who the handcuff is. Number two, it's tough to burn a roster spot for a significant amount of time, right? You draft a handcuff, that's fine. And if your guy gets injured in the first few weeks, that's great. You've got his backup. But frankly, if he doesn't, there are bye weeks. It's tough. It's tough to just burn a roster spot for a long period of time. So I feel like when I do it, I'm usually wind up cutting them. And the third is, frankly, most handcuffs, you know, there are some Derrick Henry, obviously, guys like that, but most of them aren't all that good. And if they were, they would be starters. So you wait and you hold for the handcuff. But in the end, it doesn't really wind up working out. Now, I do think that there are certain times to do it, and I do it once in a while. D'Angelo Williams, obviously, for the past couple of years, was a little different last year because we knew Le'Veon Bell was going to miss some time. But there are certain times where you know that we've seen him be successful on that team, in that scheme, in that offense. So we know, frankly, if Le'Veon Bell went down, we knew D'Angelo Williams was going to produce from a fantasy perspective. So from that sense, I could see it. But overall, I usually kind of just avoid the handcuff, rather would just go for whoever I think the best player is. And I'm not really a guy who kind of says, I don't know which one it's going to be, so I'll draft both of these guys. Because roster spots, draft capital is important. You know what I mean? Every draft selection that you make, it's important. And I'd rather not have to waste multiple spots trying to chase one spot.
Yeah. What do you think, Tegs?
So the difficulty part here, there's two arguments. The one argument is that, you know, if you grab someone like James Conner, he could win you the league if Le'Veon Bell goes down. I get that side of the argument. I really do, because, you know, do you want to take James Conner over someone like Cole Beasley? Cole Beasley is not going to help you win your league, but they're going, that's what I'm saying, is they're going in the same range. So I understand the argument for that, but I also understand the argument is that you don't want to bet on an injury. So if Le'Veon Bell, let's say he doesn't get hurt in the first 3 weeks, you know, like I don't know how far we have to go out to make this point, but let's say it's the first 3 weeks. Okay. He doesn't get hurt, and you are literally keeping on James Conner on your bench when there's guys on the waiver wire over those first 1 or 2 weeks. Those are the most important weeks of your league to pay attention to the waiver wire, because there's things that we may have missed in the depth chart. Let's say that Kevin White is all of a sudden the number one receiver for the Chicago Bears when everybody else was drafting Cameron Meredith as that guy. All of a sudden Kevin White is going to be like the hot pickup. You don't want to miss out on guys like that, like Alan Hearns a couple of years ago, you know, like he took off. These are guys that you have to pay attention to year over year. And if you have someone like James Conner on your bench, you're not really going to want to drop him because you're like, well, I drafted him for this reason. You're going to go back and forth with yourself.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a stubborn person, it is not a good strategy for you.
It's true. I paid the price last year with Dante Moncrief, and the fact that when he got hurt, I didn't want to drop him off my rosters, and it really hurt my teams during the bye weeks because I had players that I didn't want to drop, and I was stubborn like that. And I learned a very valuable lesson in some high-stakes leagues last year. So for me, I understand the argument more against drafting those guys, but at the same time, there's a different scenario in which, like, let's talk about Ezekiel Elliott right now. Darren McFadden is a guy that you'd want to draft. You know, he's starting to move up draft boards. There was someone that said on Twitter the other day that, I believe this guy covers the Cowboys, saying that you may want to draft Darren McFadden in the 6th or the 7th round. At that point, he's not a handcuff. Like now, like he's been for the last few months. Like he wasn't even being drafted in most drafts. But Darren McFadden is someone that people kind of forget. McFadden, he finished. Do you guys know that he finished number 4 in rushing yards in 2015? People seem to forget that. But he only scored.
He started like 10 games, right?
Well, he started most of the year, but the thing is, he only scored 3 touchdowns, which is why he wasn't like this big stud in fantasy. But the Dallas Cowboys team was really hurting with Tony Romo hurt. You know, the backup quarterbacks playing awful, Des Bryant getting hurt. So he didn't really get many scoring opportunities. With that being said, this offense is in a very different place now with Dak Prescott. So if you're able to get someone like Darren McFadden when Ezekiel Elliott is being threatened to be suspended anywhere from 1 to 6 games, that's when I talk about it. You know, Jacquizz Rodgers will be usable for a couple weeks. Terrence West will be usable for a couple weeks. So those are different scenarios. I think we're just talking about pure handcuffs, though. And if you're talking about pure handcuffs, you never really want to bet on an injury. I think I would roster a backup running back once you get to the point where your team, you know, you're headed to the playoffs and you're just trying to lock up. Like James Conner is someone I'd want to roster if I had Le'Veon Bell on my team, you know, later in the season.
Where would you actually draft Darren McFadden? Because I don't know. I'm definitely not excited about him in the 6th or 7th, but I don't even know if he can hold off Alfred Morris. Alfred Morris is younger. He has a better career behind him. I know McFadden has a better skill set, but, and they're saying he's probably the number 2 right now behind Ezekiel Elliott. But I'm not willing to draft him that high if I don't even know if he's the backup running back.
I think he is. I heard that the Cowboys were trying to trade Alfred Morris this offseason. Like they were just trying to get rid of him because they don't want to carry his salary anymore. And I think he's purely a short yardage back at this point in his career. I didn't have much faith in Alfred Morris even last year. I didn't want to draft him. But looking at the ADP right now, where would I feel comfortable with McFadden? I'd probably draft him over guys like Jeremy Hill. And Jeremy Hill's right around that number 49-50 running back range. I'd ahead of Gio Bernard, because these are guys that, they're basically handcuffs anyways. And if McFadden somehow, even if he gets you 2 games, he's going to be an RB1 in those 2 games. So yeah, I guess I want to say I would draft him probably inside maybe around the 10th round is when I would probably feel comfortable about drafting Derek McFadden right now, knowing what we know.
Still a little bit too high for me.
I think that and Tags, you kind of brought up a good point, where there's a difference between saying I'm going to handcuff one of my star running backs, and there's Ezekiel Elliott at this point. I mean, look, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but I think at this point, we've all kind of assumed that it's going to be at least a couple of games suspension, right? He could get nothing. We still don't know. We still aren't sure, but everything we've heard sounds like he's going to be suspended. And you mentioned Jacquizz Rodgers, Terrence West. Those guys are going to start in the beginning of the season. You know what I mean? So drafting those guys, that's totally fine, as opposed to, say, someone like Connor, who frankly, we would expect that Connor will probably not have much value absent a Le'Veon Bell injury, right? I mean, he could take some goal line work and stuff like that, but Le'Veon Bell, if he's healthy, you're not going to assume, I'm going to be starting James Conner any given week absent, right? So I think that there's a difference with that. I think my point is, honestly, if I feel like drafting a guy like McFadden, I don't really think necessarily that the fact that I own Zeke or do not own Zeke is the determining factor. At that point, you're sort of like, well, if the choice is Cole Beasley, who's a guy who's not really going to do all that much, and I'm fine at wide receiver and I'd rather go upside, I might draft a guy who is quote unquote handcuffed, somebody like Jonathan Williams, right? If LaShawn McCoy goes down, Jonathan Williams could be a league winner or something like that. He has the upside. And so I could see wasting a late pick on stuff like that. But if I've got to spend somewhere in, the 7th round, the 8th round, where you still feel like you're drafting usable guys, I'm probably just going to pass. But again, the big thing for me is I'm not necessarily looking to handcuff my own guys. A guy like McFadden, he's going to have value regardless necessarily of if I own Zeke. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not worried about handcuffing my own guys at all. I mean, if you're drafting someone in the 6th or 7th round, like a Derrick Henry, that's a reach for Derrick Henry even. But if you are, they've got to be starting for you virtually every week, and that's not McFadden. It might be McFadden for the first 2 weeks. Maybe it happens again later in the season, but that is way, way too high. Now, you talk about James Conner. I've mentioned this strategy before where if I do my draft early enough, like not the last week before the season starts, I refuse to draft a kicker. Hopefully you're not playing in a kicker league, but if you are, don't draft a kicker. You can always pick up a replacement level player who's virtually the same as the best kicker in the league on the very last second. And until then, you might as well own a backup running back for a team that loves giving tons of touches to their starting running back. If Le'Veon Bell goes down in the preseason, and it could happen. I mean, there's probably 7-8% chance one starting running back is almost certainly going to go down in the preseason. If it happens to be Le'Veon Bell and you have James Conner, you get an RB1 with your last round pick. So that's where I love drafting. With that being said, I'm not drafting him in the 12th or 13th round, just banking that Bell gets hurt. It's kind of just like, a just in case thing.
Yeah, for sure. And like, just understand that if you draft someone like that in the last round, that you have to be okay to drop him.
Exactly.
I think that's the expectation here, is that if you draft Darren McFadden in, let's say in the 11th round, and then Ezekiel Elliott, we find out he's not suspended, you have to be okay to drop a player like that and move on and get one of those guys that takes off in week 1 that we kind of didn't see coming.
There's a guy on our team, the FantasyPros team. We do a work league together, and we did keepers until this year. He kept Carlos Williams last year, okay? His name's Alon, #heartthrob. And Alon kept Carlos Williams, and he was so stubborn about the decision he made that he kept him the entire season. I mean, if you do something like that, if you draft someone in the 11th round, you're probably going to hang on to him for a long time, even if you're a reasonable person. But, and if you keep someone, you're going to hang on to him for a long time. But that Buffalo Bills situation, it was a great one. We ended up seeing what Mike Gillislee did. He led the NFL in yards per carry. They had 29 rushing touchdowns. And now the backup is Jonathan Williams. You alluded to him earlier, Dan. Tags, tell us what you think about Jonathan Williams. If McCoy goes down, is he going to be an RB1? And even if McCoy doesn't go down, Is Jonathan Williams a flex-worthy play some weeks?
That's the question, right? Is we don't know if Mike Gillislee is that special. We know that LaShawn McCoy is special. We know that he's like a top-tier running back. We don't know if Jonathan Williams is that guy. We don't know if he can go out there.
We know their offensive line's really special.
Yes, their offensive line created over 2.5 yards before contact last year, which was like by far and away the best in the NFL. Now, the offense is changing. They're not going to have as many rushing attempts. I can bank on that without Rex Ryan there. So Jonathan Williams is one of those very interesting handcuffs, and I understand why people would want to grab him, but at the same time, he's not stealing the job from LaShawn McCoy. Like, there's a 0% chance that Jonathan Williams overtakes LaShawn McCoy as the starting running back of the team. Whereas, like, if you're looking at someone like Rob Kelly and Samaje Perine, it's a lot different. Even CJ Prosise, you look further down, it's just not going to happen with LaShawn McCoy. So Jonathan Williams is purely a handcuff, and he falls into the category of those guys that if I get later in the season, like let's say I'm in week 8, I'm sitting there at 6-2, I know I'm going to be in the playoffs and all that. Yes, that's when I stop holding on to a hopeful on my bench and I snag someone like Jonathan Williams, because if for some reason something happened to LaShawn McCoy, it could destroy your team if you don't have someone to replace him. And it just so happens that Jonathan Williams would be his direct handcuff. So I do like the situation. I just don't know if Jonathan Williams is talented enough to handle that situation. And if on top of that, if Buffalo would trust him, giving him, 18 touches a game.
So I know Tags loves DeAndre Washington. So Dan, I want to ask you about DeAndre Washington or Jonathan Williams. DeAndre Washington, as you guys know, backup running back for Marshawn Lynch in Oakland. He was really good when he got a chance. Another great offensive line. I think Washington is more skilled. I prefer him by a little bit. Dan, where do you stand on these two?
I think between the two, I would prefer Jonathan Williams. And there's a couple of reasons. First, I love the Raiders situation. I don't know about you guys. I mean, if possible, I will own negative shares of Marshawn Lynch this year. I am floored by his ADP. Tags, you and I did that expert mock a couple of weeks back, and Jake Seeley, who's great and is incredibly accurate, I think he took him in the middle of the second round. And I remember being completely...
Well, that kind of changes my opinion. I trust Jake Seeley.
I completely agree, because Jake is amazing. You know what I mean? So I was like... But this has always sort of stuck out to me as like a PR stunt. Do you know his jersey is the top selling jersey right now in all of the NFL? No. Yes, the Marshawn Lynch Oakland Raiders jersey. So it's always just seemed weird. Anyway, I don't really expect much from Marshawn Lynch. So that being said, it is a great situation. The Raiders have a great line. But here's the thing. Is it DeAndre Washington? Or is it Jalen Richard? I mean, last year, Washington averaged 7.5 touches per game and 24 touches in the 2 games that Latavius Murray missed. Jalen Richard, he averaged 7 touches a game and 20 in the 2 games that he missed. So basically, they were an exact handcuff situation. They're kind of similar backs. They're smaller and they're decent pass catchers. Now, my guess would be of the 2 guys, I'd probably prefer Washington. But if Marshawn Lynch went down, then I think it would be closer to a 50-50 split. Whereas in Buffalo, I'm pretty sure, that if McCoy went down, and he obviously has been nicked up a lot, that it's just going to be Jonathan Williams, and that's great. And the other thing about Williams is, look, the last 2 seasons, both Carlos Williams and Mike Gillislee, they finished as top 36 running backs on the season, and they were top 10 in the games that McCoy missed entirely. Now, obviously, Tags, you alluded to it, it's a little bit of a different game because Rex Ryan and his ground and pound, it's not there anymore, but it still is obviously, it's a great line, absolutely. I like Jonathan Williams. I feel like casual owners see that he was 3rd on the draft in the depth chart, and he was a 6th-round draft pick, but he missed his entire senior year at Arkansas. That's the only reason why he went that late in the draft. And from what I've seen of him, and again, I'm not, a scout, and I haven't seen that. He barely played last year, but he kind of strikes me as a good fit for Rick Dennison's offense. They got the zone blocking scheme that he used to run with the Texans and the Broncos. He's got good vision. He's got patience. I think he'd be a monster if McCoy went down. And frankly, as we saw with Gillislee, and I don't know if they'll do the same thing this year, but they didn't like to give McCoy that much goal line work. He's injury prone a little bit. He's getting older. So Williams could be valuable even without it. So for me, Williams is kind of my top guy of all these quote unquote handcuffs. And although I like DeAndre Washington a lot, Richard's presence just kind of makes me move off him.
Yeah, I think both of you guys are right in the fact, like Bobby, you started talking about DeAndre Washington, hearing Dan talk about Jonathan Williams. It's funny, even before Dan said anything, like all those points that he said are correct, and that's the thing, you can't dispute that. I redid my projections yesterday. I kind of went through all the teams and looked at it again, and as much as I like DeAndre Washington, there is no guarantee that he would be the direct handcuff, that he would all of a sudden get 70% of the touches, like we wanted him to. Jalen Richard is a guy that saw 39 targets last year compared to Washington's 23. So is like Washington being a smaller guy, they didn't even use him as much in the passing game. So there are concerns there. I think DeAndre Washington happens to be more talented, which is why I think that I've put him in the lottery ticket more often than not. And, talking about a Raiders team that's going to have game scripts that are probably going to fit what his skill set does. Whereas Jonathan Williams on the Bills, their defense has definitely gone in reverse. I don't think that their team's going to be very good this year. That's my concerns there. But I think I'm with Dan in the fact that Jonathan Williams, I probably would if I was forced to pick between the two, just because he is the clear-cut one, and I don't think they have any other choice in terms of their depth chart. To go to Jonathan Williams, I don't think they have a choice. Whereas the Raiders, it would come down to Washington or Richard, or the worst of all possible scenarios, that they split the time load. So I agree with Dan, but at the same time, I think they're both extremely close for me.
I'm with Dan too. I mean, I know I said DeAndre Washington, but he swept me in the name that player game, so I just have to admit I'm an inferior being.
No, honestly, I think the thing with Williams is that Gillislee, I don't know. Like Tag 2 said it too. I really don't know how good Mike Gillislee is. I have no idea. I'm certainly not as high on him this year going in, but that's really more for Patriots reasons. But for me, look, Williams is a guy who I feel like, frankly, in a pinch, you're going to be able to flex him during bye weeks and stuff like that, regardless of if McCoy is healthy or not. And I don't think the same can be said necessarily for DeAndre Washington unless Lynch is injured. So for me, that's kind of the tiebreaker. And of all the handcuffs, I think Williams is honestly the guy who I would most want to own, because I really do think he could be a difference maker if there is an injury.
Now, I've got two more handcuffs for you guys before we move on to talk about auction drafts. And these two aren't as exciting. I loved Ryan Matthews last year. He's always been super efficient. I know he has fumble issues. I know he has concussion issues and just can't stay on the field. But if Blunt gets hurt, I mean, Ryan Matthews behind that offensive line could still be really good. And there's only so many backup running backs who could be an RB1. I actually think Matthews is one of them.
So hold on. I want to stop this right here, because if Ryan Matthews is on the Eagles come opening day, Ryan Matthews should be starting over LeGarrette Blount. I don't think he's a handcuff. I think so too. I think LeGarrette Blount is the one that needs to be coming off the bench. Yeah. And it's really odd to see that Ryan Matthews hasn't been cut, because I know that a lot of people have been expecting that to happen for quite some time. But there was something I saw the other day as they're waiting. It's going to be cheaper for them to cut him later on. But at the same time, LeGarrette Blount has openly said to the media, he said, I don't know what my role is on this team. He basically just went to whatever team wanted him that would pay him anything, because nobody wanted LeGarrette Blount. And I think it's for good reason. I'm not a big LeGarrette Blount fan. Like I said, if Ryan Matthews is on the Eagles roster in week 1, I am not drafting LeGarrette Blount anywhere near the top 30. And Ryan Matthews, even, it's a little bit cloudier because they have so many running backs there now. It's tough to even say that he would be top 30. So honestly, I'm probably avoiding that backfield altogether.
Even though they have a great offensive line.
They do, yeah. But
I think you're right, though. I think you're right.
It's going to be extremely difficult. I looked through that with Ryan Matthews last year. Before he was even hurt, in the first 10 games of the season, there were 6 games where he saw fewer than 10 carries. And that was with a healthy Ryan Matthews. They were sharing the workload between, I think it was Kenjon Barner, it was Wendell Smallwood, it was Darren Sproles, and now they added Donnell Pumphrey and LeGarrette Blount to steal goal line touches. Now there's better wide receivers, and it is a mess. I don't think Doug Peterson knows what he's doing.
I'll tell you what, though, the Philadelphia Eagles have a great team. I'm actually going to pick them to win the NFC East over the Cowboys this year.
No, the Giants. I'm definitely saying.
The Giants are good too. That's a good division.
Yeah, I don't think the Cowboys are going to be very good this year. I will go on record as saying that I like their offense. I like the steps they've taken, but they've neglected that defense. They just let a couple players walk, and it's not looking good for the Cowboys.
All right, Dan. So Ryan Matthews we talked about, and also Marlon Mack, also behind one of these older, bigger, slow running backs, Frank Gore. So who do you prefer between these two? Marlon Mack, I think, could take over the job. Ryan Matthews has a big ceiling, but is he even going to be on an NFL roster?
Yeah, between the two of them, I'll probably take neither. Really neither guy. I mean, honestly, I feel like we're going to be doing this podcast in 2023, and we're going to be like, I know Frank Gore rushed for 1,000 yards last year, but I think this is the year he falls off the table. You know what I mean? The dude never dies. But even if he did get hurt or really fully declined, I mean, Robert Turbin is still there, right? And there's buzz about him somehow this offseason. They love him, and he had 7 scores last year. He knows the offense. Mac's a great athlete. He had the great combine, but I think he's much more of a future guy. For now, if you're forcing me to draft one of them, it would probably be Mac, just because, frankly, I'll be totally shocked if Matthews is still on the Eagles once he can pass a physical. I mean, I think that
I think he'll actually end up with the Texans.
Yes.
Based on what's going on with Foreman, because they need a backup running back. Alfred Blue, I don't think is the guy. Matthews could be a good fit there behind Lamar Miller.
Yeah, if he does go to Houston, that's right. That's kind of sort of the first team that popped into my head that he might be able to go. I'd like him a lot better there. I mean, Tags talked about it. The Eagles have so many running backs at this point, so I really would be not interested in him basically at all if he went to the Eagles. If he went to Houston and he was sort of backing up Lamar Miller, who gets nicked up all the time, and he might, maybe he could have more of a role there, I might prefer him. But I'm not targeting.
And they're not going to cut him the next time he fumbles.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Eagles fans are mad at Ryan Matthews. Texans fans don't really probably know much about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, either way, I don't really like either guy. I mean, Marlon Mack, I feel like fantasy owners generally, we like kind of the unknown rather than the known. And Ryan Matthews is kind of a known quantity. He's good. He's talented. But, we don't think of him as a superstar. Whereas Marlon Mack, obviously in that offense, we think, wow, if he took over. But I don't think he's going to. So between the two, I'd take Mack. But again, that's me sort of assuming that Ryan Matthews is going to get cut and land somewhere as a pure backup.
So Mack's going about number 50 right now for running backs. Let's say we find out news that Andrew Luck actually is going to miss a significant amount of time. I mean, he's still not throwing the ball. It's something I don't want to deal with. But you think if Andrew Luck's gone, it's worse for the Colts running backs?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think they slow down the offense. If they don't have Luck, they slow down the offense, and therefore it's better to have Frank Gore and Robert Turbin, where it's like this entire offseason. The only reason I've been banging the drum for Marlon Mack is because he is lightning in a bottle. Am I saying that he's the most talented running back? No. But what I'm saying is that he fits the offense and what they should be doing. The Colts should not be a team that's trying to win running the ball and playing defense. That's not the team that the Colts are.
If Andrew Luck's gone, they might as well go for the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, no, it's true. They need to know their identity, and that's the thing with the Colts is like if they know their identity, they know that they're a bad defense, that they need to build it up. I know that they're trying to start doing that, but it's not going to happen in year one. They need to understand their strengths. And Frank Gore, unfortunately, he fits a team with a control style ball, like a team that wants to run the football. They want to manage the clock. They want to eat it, and they can stop teams on defense. That's what Frank Gore is for. That's arguably what Robert Turbin is for too. And Turbin's been getting hyped this offseason saying he's going to have a bigger role this year because he earned it. And I can't disagree.
I like Turbin.
He was really good on the goal line last year, and I think regardless, Marlon Mack's not going to have the goal line work, but he is lightning in a bottle. He's a guy that could play in the no-huddle offense. You'll live with his inefficiencies in between the tackles in order to take advantage of what he can do, what Frank Gore can't do. Frank Gore cannot break an 80-yard run. He can't catch a pass out of the backfield for 60 yards right now. Marlon Mack can do that every single week. He gives you that upside. So for me, if Luck's there, I think Mack needs to find his way onto the field. They need to put him on the field and kind of find out what they have there. And then, if Luck's not there, just light the Colts on fire.
Okay, guys, auction drafts. I love auction drafts. If you guys haven't done an auction draft before, I know it takes a long time, but it is the absolute most fun part about fantasy sports, in my opinion. I love trading, but auction drafts, they take the cake. So I guess what I want to ask, Dan, you've written extensive articles on auction draft strategy. I want to pick your brain on how you prepare for auction drafts.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I kind of divide it into 3 steps. One is I create my values. The second is I divide my players into tiers. And the third is I create a spending plan for the auction. So, I mean, in baseball, because it's a rotisserie format and stuff like that, I feel like your auction values have to be precise. And I never go over those values. I don't know about you guys, but for me in a fantasy football auctions, the values that I come up with are much more of a guide. I'm not sort of married to them. Absolutely.
I'm strict to it. I will not pass
I'm not going to do that in fantasy football because I feel like I've been to fantasy football auctions that are just completely bananas. You know what I mean? You go in there and we'll probably talk about it later, but every auction is different. And I feel like I'm not going to be somebody who's just going to hang out because you cannot afford to completely miss on the top 20 or 25 players. You're going to have to be able to be a little flexible. But honestly, at this point, and we're all super busy, we all do stuff, I do my own projections at this point, but for the most part, when I'm doing auctions, because I do a lot of them, I do use the FantasyPros auction calculator, and it's mostly because I assume that Bobby's had tons of input into it, and Bobby is super nerdy, and I feel like so there's enough of nerdness that goes in them that I feel like I can trust them. But again, I kind of, yeah, you're welcome, buddy. I kind of cross-reference them with my own sort of projections, and they're usually pretty close because it uses consensus projections. But anyway, you can do them yourself, but it takes a long time and create your own auction value. So anyway, you got to have auction values that you kind of feel if you put in your own league settings. Then I do tiers where you just basically obviously take similar caliber players in the same position group and you kind of break them down by tiers. That's important. Obviously, it's however you feel kind of the cutoffs are. And it's important, it helps guide your auction. It helps you know when to go that extra dollar, when to back off. You can feel comfortable with the prices. If you see what David Johnson's going for, you can feel pretty confident what Le'Veon Bell is going to go for and stuff like that. And your spending plan, and for me, this is always the most important thing. I mean, you need your values and you need your tiers. But you've got to have a spending plan. Break it down by position. You can't be married to it, right? Okay, so last year I had a league buying 2 running backs. I divided up. I said, I think I'm going to go in planning to spend $60 on running backs. Based on previous prices, I said, I'll spend about 40 on one and 20 on the other based on that. But in the end, things kind of happened, and I spent 27 on one and 28 on the other, which meant I took that extra $5 and I moved it over to wide receivers and stuff like that. I always do an Excel spreadsheet with formulas. So if I have a 38 and a 22 plan for my running backs, which totals 60, but then I spend $50 on my top running back, I know automatically by just putting in 50 instead of the 38, I'm $12 over my current budget if I keep my same spending plan. And that allows me to sort of adjust it on the fly just to make sure that my total budget is always equaling 200. So essentially it's 3 steps: create your values, create your tiers, and then build a spending plan going in. That to me, again, is kind of the most critical part.
Tegs, what do you do to plan, man?
So I think you touched on a lot of it. I am different in the fact that I don't hold myself to anything in regards to position-wise. I don't go in saying I want to spend so much per position, because I think that's almost like going into a snake draft and saying that I want to do the 0 RB strategy or I want to do a different strategy. Like, I don't ever do that. I just go in looking for value, and I think the best way to do that is to practice. And the people that don't like auction draft are the people that aren't really that into fantasy football. And I hate to say it that way, but the reason that the diehards love auctions is because you must come prepared. Like, you cannot wing it like you do in a snake draft. Like, I can show up to, if someone invited me to a draft right after the show and I didn't even have my cheat sheet, I could just go and I could be fine. I could just draft a team and I'd be okay. I cannot do that in an auction. You have to have the values of players like readily available. And, there's so many different cheat sheets you can go out there, and you really have to know your league settings. You really have to know, the salary cap and your league mates. So for me, what I do is, and I know it's self-promotion here, but I used it before I worked for FantasyPros. So I honestly say that the Draft Wizard is the best thing to practice with, because
it's the greatest thing in the whole world. Greater than hot sauce soup.
Well, anything's better than that, but it's better than a lot of things. I think we could agree on that, where you can go in there and mess with your auction values. Like, I know, so Brad Evans invited me into one of his leagues last year, and it was an industry like auction league, and it was a 2-quarterback one, and I didn't do very many 2-quarterback leagues. So I was like, man, I really need to practice. So I went in and I finessed this cheat sheet where I had the values down. I loved it. I was doing mock drafts, and I was ending up with the team that I wanted because I had these values in place. And so I nailed that draft. Like, I dominated it. I ended up losing a couple players, but I finished 3rd in that league. But I knew I nailed the draft because I was down the values. But my tips that I would say, if you really want a player, you have your list, you know your values. If you really want a player, be willing to pay a few extra dollars. Maybe, but I never go higher than maybe $3 or $5 over, just because you have to know your limit. Don't be too protective of your money, because you don't want to have money left over at the end and think, damn, I could have got that guy if I would have spent $1 more. That's why you always say, I'm willing to go 3 over if I really, really want a guy. Because that draft that I was talking about, it started, and I threw up Aaron Rodgers. I thought people were going to overpay. It was a 2-quarterback league, and I had my value on him, and I think I had it set at like $41, something like that. And I put him up for auction. I ended up getting him for, I think it was 31. And I was like, wow.
Man, you've got to be kidding me.
And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, did I overpay? Did I get this cheat sheet wrong? Am I wrong? And then next up, I nominated Cam Newton, because I was like, someone's going to overpay. I don't even like Cam. I got him for like $27, and he was like 35 on my list. So I was like, And then as the draft went on, people started to realize kind of what happened. Someone paid, I want to say it was like Carson Palmer. They paid like 27, which was like the same price that I got Cam Newton for. So it was
Cam Newton was the number 1 QB last year.
No, he was.
Well, going into the season.
Well, right. He was supposed to be, but I wasn't willing to pay that. But it just goes to show, if you have your values, trust them. Trust your values. And if you're like, wow, nobody's like around me taking these players, you're going to see it happen later in the draft. And there's a lot more to auctions. I know we're going to try and talk about as much as we can, but that's my general thing, is just go in with a strategy, like a cheat sheet, and understand that you can vary off that, but trust it. And the only way that you can trust it is if you practice and you get it to the point where your cheat sheet is good.
Yeah, I love a lot of the things you said. I disagree with you guys a little bit. Like, you say you can go $3 to $5 over. I build that into my dollar system, so I'm not willing to go $1 over that. And when you do that, when you're disciplined, you get a lot of values, and you like the way your team looks. But we'll just agree to disagree there. That's not that big of a deal. I mentioned the Draft Wizard. I love using the Draft Wizard. That is virtually all I do to prepare for auction drafts. I mean, if you do an auction draft, it usually takes 3, sometimes 5 hours, depending on who you're drafting with and if it's an event. Now, it's an all-day event. It's a great thing. But when you do a mock draft, you can go on one of these other websites and do an auction mock draft. We're talking 3 hours again. That's what it is. But if you use the Draft Wizard, I can breeze through one of these things in 15 minutes.
Right.
I can do 2 of them over lunch. You know what I mean? The more practice you get with these bad boys, the better, because people are going to show up and they're going to be surprised about how everyone's going. If you've gone into your draft and you've done 20 mock drafts, you know exactly what's going to happen, and Draft Wizard does a great job of simulating that. So it's one of the best things on our site is this auction mock draft simulator.
Yeah, what else helps though too is to keep track of everyone else's spending. Like some people underestimate that. If you're doing a live auction draft, bring your laptop and set up the Draft Wizard because you can link it to your live.
You can sync it.
Yes, you can sync it to your live draft, and that's exactly what I did in Brad's league. Is so that I was able to see like you're like, okay, these positions are gone. This person has this much money, and what it does, it automatically keeps track of the max bid that someone can have for a player while filling all of their roster slots, and it's so helpful. Like I said, if you don't, it's hard to get this all to come across over a podcast, but if you go in there and you check it out, you will be more prepared than ever for an auction draft. And on top of that, you're going to be ready draft day because you could sync it right up with your draft.
And the one other thing I'll say about the sort of practicing with the auctions is that it allows you kind of to see how you like to build your team best. Because if you're not that familiar with auctions, you might not know. You know what I mean? You might be the type of person who needs to spend huge on a couple of first round players and you like the way your team comes up better like that. You might be someone who doesn't buy someone for the first, 36 nominations and kind of goes all late. So that sort of also, because you can do it so quickly, it allows you to try a number of different strategies in advance. So again, practice is always the best thing. Mocking is always one of the best things. So obviously we all have a little bit of different way of going about it. So I agree, just sort of practice as much as you can.
So I've got a few random tips for you guys here, and I want you guys to chip in your ideas as well. When I'm bringing up players in the draft, do not waste an opportunity. You look at who's in your draft, okay? They're all Bengals fans. Bring up AJ Green, bring up Andy Dalton early because you know that they're going to overspend on those players. Bring up Marshawn Lynch because he's a popular player and he'll go for a lot more than he's worth. Don't waste your chance to get people to spend over their value because that means you're going to get undervalue with the remaining players. That makes a lot of sense, right?
For sure. Yeah, no, I like the idea of going down our list. So I have like a list of tips because I wanted to at least get these out in the podcast just so that so if someone's going to an auction draft for the first time, you could know. So I say we just go down the line. We each say a tip and go through until we don't have any more. But
sounds good.
So I say do not go there to do anything but draft. Like if you're on site, you are there to draft. Like you party afterwards. Do not get drunk. Like don't do it. Like a lot of people want to be like, oh, I want to have a few beers. We're just having a good time. Just draft and then worry about that afterwards.
I think my overall number one tip is don't panic. Auctions are crazy. If you haven't done them before, or if you've only done one or two, they're nuts. First, things are going to be different from your last auction, for sure. Guys are going to go for way more than you expected. You're going to miss out on a deal every once in a while. You're going to think you've won a player only to have the auctioneer saying, so, and then have somebody jump in and steal it from you. Take a breath. It's no big deal. Things like that. Honestly, because you can, to use a poker term, you can go on tilt a little bit if you're not careful. And so the biggest thing is just always to relax. Don't panic even when things seem like they're going off the rails.
And one of the things about the don't panic, first of all, don't be afraid to be embarrassed because everyone's going to be there. They're going to be seeing your bids and there's going to be comments about virtually every pick. And you might think it's personal, but it's just the fun of the auction draft. So, don't be afraid to be embarrassed. But I'll say this. You're going to be super embarrassed if you get in bidding wars, trying to drive up someone's price and you get stuck with someone you want. Don't be the guy. Somebody else is going to do it. So what if, 3 of your league mates get a really nice value on a player that doesn't really fit your needs? Don't be the guy that's bidding them up because you are going to ruin your entire roster and you're going to be thinking about that the whole season.
For sure. One of my rules is the first player you nominate, put up someone you don't want. You want to gauge the draft. Like that's basically what it comes down to. You're going to learn in the first couple picks, like how people are spending their money. Because if you put up someone that you don't want to start, like let's say that,
So bring up Amari Cooper.
Well, Bobby would bring up Amari Cooper. I'd bring up Keenan Allen. And I want to see, how people are spending their money. And because that's the thing is people are timid at the beginning. That's when you're able to steal values because some people are like, oh, I won't bid on the first 15 players that are auctioned.
Yeah. It's always one way or the other. They always go crazy at the beginning or they're super timid.
Exactly. So I always bring up someone I don't want at the start. I just want to gauge the crowd.
So I actually, it's kind of a tip, but it goes along with that because I do feel like who you nominate is always kind of this topic of discussion where some people are like, well, the main thing you want to do when you nominate players at any point in the auction is just to get money off the table, right? And I think that is partially true, right? If you know you're not going after one of the top running backs, for example, that's just not kind of what you are unless they're a great value, then go ahead and get them out there, let people spend their money. If you have your quarterback position locked up and you want to get others like Tags was just saying with Cam Newton, you know what I mean, throw it out. And frankly, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you might get a value in something like that. But there are plenty of times, I don't know about you guys, where I'm nominating guys that I actually want. I remember last year I was in an auction and I kind of was like, all right, I kind of expected to go after a second-tier running back. And at that point, the only one that was left was LaShawn McCoy. So when it came up, I'm kind of sitting there and I'm like, okay, well, should I nominate other players to get them to spend money so people have less money to go after LaShawn McCoy? That's fine. But what if when it comes up to LaShawn McCoy, somebody is there and he really wants LaShawn McCoy, and then it's going to go for $20 over what I had him valued. And in the meantime, I've been passing on values that I could have had at wide receiver.
You want to know. Exactly. You want to know before it gets too late.
So I think, to the extent we want to call this a tip, I think what it is sort of really be aware of who is left and who is not and sort of what you're looking at going forward. And when you know, there are times you're going to need to nominate somebody that you want. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't always just try to nominate somebody who you don't want to get money off the table and stuff like that. There are plenty of times where at some point you've got to know who you're going to have on your team because a lot of times people get into the thing of, I'm just going to pass up. Oh, that's a great value, but you know what? I don't really want that. I'm going to get Doug Martin later. I want Doug Martin, blah, blah, blah. You know what? It takes one guy in your league who really wants Doug Martin and suddenly passing on Mark Ingram, who happened to go for $6 in your auction because you're like, oh, I really want Doug Martin for 10. That might not look so good. So again, nominate people at some point who you want.
All right, guys, this one kind of piggybacks off of what Tags already said about the don't drink at your draft. Don't eat at your draft. Don't be the guy with, eating chicken wings at your draft and pizza and not really paying attention. If you're not focusing on the draft, you're not doing it right. And again, I mean, this might be a little too much, but seriously, go poop before your draft starts. Because if you're leaving when you're doing that and they're like, well, we'll just bring someone up or whatever, there's always one guy in a draft room who's like, well, I got to go do this. And then he misses out on something. You know what I mean? It's not worth it. Auction drafts are long. You got to be prepared. It's like if you're running a cross country race, what are you going to do before you draft? You're going to go to the restroom. Take care of business.
I feel like you should write an article saying wear an adult diaper to your auction. You could headline it with that. Be like, look, you got to pull out all the stops, man. This is an auction, all right? It's not for kids. Let's go. Let's do it.
That is too funny. Well, that point, Bobby, though, some people actually say that they get up and walk away if they're getting anxious or, if they're feeling that they'll walk away and for 15 minutes. And I'm like, I disagree with that. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't think you should ever get up because you could be missing out on an extreme value that comes up during that point. But I guess my next tip would be don't wait until the end of a tier to grab a player. Everybody knows who the top 6 wide receivers are, how they round them out. But if you wait until that 6th one, people are going to overpay for the last one because they're like, well, this is the last of the bunch. You typically don't want to be at the beginning, but you also don't want to be at the end. I think where you can get the most value in drafts are the second tier guys. I wrote it in my article for the Baltimore Ravens. I did a player profile for their entire backfield, and I said that getting Dixon and West may be a great strategy in redraft because you can get both of them for extremely cheap in an auction. You could lock up Dixon and West for probably half the price of someone like LeGarrette Blount. And with that, you're going to have a starting running back every single week, regardless of who it is starting.
Yeah, no, that's a good one too. I guess my next one would be don't leave money on the table. I mean, it's kind of the cardinal sin of auction leagues, outside of keeper leagues, of course, because it's if you can get guys for cheaper, that's great. But for the most part, if you've left money on the table at the end of your auction, maybe $1, fine, whatever. But if you've done that, then you've probably done something wrong. That's kind of what you can't take it with you. Okay. You got to go out there. And I know it feels weird, kind of just sort of, all right, whatever. Spend your money. Definitely do it. When you leave, you want to have $0 and you want to feel good about it.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, Dan, you mentioned the keepers and everything. The auction draft wizard actually syncs with keeper leagues, so you can, put in your keeper values, and it tells you how much people are worth. It's a really cool addition. Now, I've got one more tip that's worth mentioning, and this one isn't as important, but I found it to be useful, and I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but I actually did this as a joke the first time, but I do it every single auction draft from now on. I wear a suit and a tie when I go to an auction draft because it gets people off their game just a little bit. They think you're joking around and it intimidates them a little, thinking that you're, being really serious. And then I'm the guy that's trash talking and making fun of them. Like if I'm prepared enough, I don't have to pay as close of attention because I can trash talk people and throw them off their game. Because like you said, Dan, people are prone to panic. And if you're the guy that's trash talking them, I mean, they're falling into these bidding wars and all kinds of stuff like that.
Man, I feel like Tags and I are all given like crazy stuff, and you're like, look, wear a diaper and then wear a suit, and you're good to go in an auction, right? Like that. Those are the Bobby Sylvester fantasy auction tips.
That is fantastic. That's I don't know if I have anything else to go on top of that. I think one thing I would say, don't be the nominee, like don't be the person calling out the values. You guys should always have someone that's not in your draft doing that, just because that allows you to focus on the draft. And one more is that so let's say that you're a person that likes defenses. So let's throw out the Broncos. They're probably the number one defense going off boards this year. If you want, throw them out for $2 at the start of the draft.
Yep.
Because the thing is, most people will go from $1 to go to $2 for a defense, but not many people will go up to $3. So if you just put it at $2, you know what I mean? Because if someone goes from 1 to 2, you're not going to want to go to 3. If you started at 2, then you can actually end up turning out you get the best defense for $2. Outside of that, though,
don't do that with kickers, though.
No, I agree.
Right.
I agree. Kickers are, like Bobby said, you don't even need to draft one. Like, I actually agree with that strategy, is that you don't need to get one. But if you don't get that top tier defense, don't worry about it. That means somebody else spent $3 on them, and then you can stream your defenses like we do every year. But there are just a few defenses that I would consider that with. But it's just, I always found it interesting. If you throw out $2, you'll get them. Whereas if you did it for $1, you probably won't.
I actually love that tip. That's a really, really good tip. My last one, and I think it's a little more kind of like, it's probably should have been brought up earlier. I mean, you heard Tags and I kind of, do it differently in terms of how we approach. I like to break down my spending plan by position, as opposed to, Tags goes in there and just says, I'm just going to get the values wherever they come to me. And that's fine. And again, to be clear, I mean, breaking it down by position, I never spend what I come in there intending to spend. You know what I mean? That's just sort of a guideline for how I'm going to do, and I'm constantly moving money around. But regardless, I think we'd all probably agree, do not necessarily get married to a player. Don't go in there and say, no matter what, I'm getting out of here with David Johnson, no matter what. Because again, it takes one other guy in your auction to say, you know what, I'm getting out of here with David Johnson. And the next thing you know, you're spending $80, of a $200 budget or whatever you want, or $100. So, I mean, it's fine if you want to target a certain player, if you think that's right, but just don't get married to it. Above all, be flexible. You know what I mean? Just keep your options open.
And don't tell your league mates, like, before the draft, man, I just love Antonio Brown so much. I remember there was one guy who did this the year that Antonio Brown was this big sleeper and everyone thought he was going to break out. And it was the year that he broke out. And he was telling all his friends, man, I just love Antonio Brown this year. And everyone bid him up. It was hilarious. So he ended up going for like twice the value he should have. And it worked out for him, but sometimes that doesn't really work out.
Yeah, in case that's not obvious, don't give away your strategy before the auction. That should be a pretty obvious one. So make sure you don't do that.
People get so excited about it, they do it anyway, though, even though it's obvious.
For sure. And I think after all these tips that we've talked about, and there's more that you obviously can learn about auctions and stuff like that, but it really does come down to, if you want to be good in an auction, you practice and you will be. Like, you can't fail an auction draft if you prepare for it. And that's the thing. Some people will walk in there and thinking, oh, I know everything about football, I could just walk in and do it. No, you can't. Like, because I'm telling you, I couldn't.
Unless you wear a suit.
I couldn't even do it. Bobby might be able to in his suit and diaper, but I cannot.
Okay, guys, before we end this show, I've got 3 strategies that people sometimes use, and I'm not super fond of any of these strategies. There's one I'm more prone to consider. I want to see what you guys think about these strategies, okay? One of them is that you should hoard your money until people run out so you can be a bully and just get whoever you want. The other one, you get 3 stars and 12 scrubs. So I'm talking like you can get 3 of the top 6 players in the draft, and then the rest of them are just like replacement level guys. It's a really interesting strategy. That's the one that tempts me because I've seen it work before. I've never been bold enough to do it, but it's really fun. The other one, I mean, this one kind of makes sense too, but I don't know. I'd feel so sick to my stomach if my roster looked like this. Stars tend to go above their value. I mean, the auction calculator will tell you what the value is, and we're talking Le'Veon Bell's going to go $15 more than his value. In a league with $200 to spend, that's a ton of wasted money. So the strategy is you don't get any of the top 15 players. Instead, you just load up with like 8 third to fifth round type of players, and your team is just stacked, but you don't have any stars. Guys, what do you feel about these three strategies? Do any of them make sense to you, Tags?
Not really. Like I said, I mean, I think that's the best part of auctions, right? Is that you get to go in and you get to get any player you want. So why pigeonhole yourself into a strategy? You know what I mean? So like for me, no. I mean, I know there's the stars and scrubs idea and all that. And if that's the way my roster works out, because nobody was like, if I have Le'Veon Bell for $52 on my sheet and then I have David Johnson for $49 and nobody wants to match me on those, I'm going to end up stars and scrubs just because that's just what happened to me. But at the same time, I'm not going to go in saying to myself, like, you know, like I said, pigeonholing yourself into a strategy. That's the nice part about auctions, though, is that in redraft right now, like in a snake draft, there's like a dead zone in rounds 4 and 5, which is why I'd be okay taking Aaron Rodgers in the 4th round. But you don't have to do that in an auction. You don't have to say I don't want any of those players. I'd rather just wait on John Brown.
That's why I love auctions.
Yeah. I think for me, I kind of agree with Tags that none of them, you know what, again, I don't usually go in with a specific sort of strategy. I do think that hoarding your money for the end makes probably the least sense because frankly, you're not going to trade a 2nd round pick for, you know, 6 10th round picks. You know what I mean? Like if you're the guy at the end of the auction who's like, haha, I have more money, I can buy whichever one of these scrubs I want. Your team probably hasn't turned out that well. And stars and scrubs, again, it might work out that way. It's fine, but I usually feel like the guy, for the most part, who winds up with David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, they almost never are the guys who go for the discounts anyway. You know what I mean? Like you said, Bobby, they usually go for $10 or $15 more than they're actually worth. So those guys don't usually wind up having. You can do that. You've just got to be, number one, you have to completely avoid injury. And number two, you've got to be really good on the waiver wire. So, I mean, it could work. Among those three, to the extent there is one that I find a little more appealing, it actually would be avoiding the top 15 players. Now, I don't really do that. I feel like I find myself more generally getting guys in the back end of the 1st round, and that's just sort of how it works out. That's where I find the deals are. But I mean, you know, you do need some studs, but if you get like a ton of 3rd rounders and stuff like that, and your whole team from top to bottom, there are literally no holes, I think it could be workable. But I think in the end, the bottom line is, as Tag said, there's no strategy that wins. There's no strategy that doesn't win. Just leave yourself open and see how your auction kind of plays out, you know?
I remember back in the day, some guy got Sean Alexander, Priest Holmes, and Marshall Faulk. Those were his 2 running backs in his flex play. And it's like, seriously, how do you beat that? I mean, if we're talking about David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, and then your number one wide receiver, and let's say you get Aaron Rodgers as well, and then your number one receivers like Quincy Enunwa, you've got Mike Wallace, Pierre Garçon, all these guys who are like decent, you know they're going to get touches. I think I'd still feel pretty good about my roster if I had Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson and Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you probably would. The thing is, what's weird is that I feel like the guys who wind up having these completely stacked rosters in auction leagues, it's always because they happen to get, you know, DeMarco Murray. You know what I mean? I remember 3 years ago, you know, I sort of missed out on the big running backs, and I wound up with Marshawn Lynch and DeMarco Murray, who were sort of like the back end sort of things. And both those guys were completely unstoppable that year. But I didn't pay for them as you paid for the top guys. I feel like for the most part, the really, truly like elite rosters, they always come in where you get the guys that people aren't expecting to be these utterly dominant studs. And it works out. The guys who go in there and pay for those things and then have sort of like the $1 rest of the team, I feel like their teams never work out quite as well.
That's a great point. All right, guys. Well, that's all we have for today's show. I want to say thanks again to Dan for coming on. It was awesome talking about auctions with you. You just have so much insight on it, and thank you for also humiliating me on it.
You are welcome. Frankly, I'll come back and do that anytime.
All right, guys. Well, I also want to say thank you to the sponsors of today's show, rtsports.com and pristineauction.com. We really appreciate you guys tuning in and for all the ratings and reviews. It's just been awesome having all your support. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening. And enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.